Hey guys, today we're going to be working on a 12 by 16 shed from Best Barns. Step number one in the instructions is we have these 4x4s here that we have to create runners to build the frame for the floor system of the shed to sit on. If you look here, the 4x4s are in 8-foot pieces, and we actually had to cut 2-foot pieces of pressure treated 2x4s to connect the two 8-foot 4x4s together, making 16-foot runners. So we're gonna attach these runners together. We're gonna carry them over to the site actually first, then we're gonna attach them together, level them out, and get started on the floor system. As you can see, our 4x4 runners are all set in place over here. The next thing we have to do is we have to cut all of the 2x4s that were provided for the deluxe floor system for our 12 by 16 shed here. So I'm going to take some measurements, and we're going to ensure for our particular shed, which is 12 by 16, the width of our floor system cannot exceed 12 foot in this particular case. Whatever shed you're building, it would be obviously a different width based on the instruction manual, based on the shed that you purchased. So for today, we're going to make sure that all of our floor joists are cut to the same length. That way, when everything's put together, it is square actually. 141 inches. Okay, now we have all of our floor joists are cut to the appropriate length. The next thing we have to do is the end boards. We need to make sure in our particular case they are cut to 16 foot long for our shed. Exact. Our next step is to lay both of our 16-foot long runners, in this particular case, the end boards, side by side so we can mark out for all of our joists. The first thing we're going to want to make sure is that they are flush on the end like this. We're going to hook our tape measure, bring it across like this. Our very first measurement, according to the instructions, is 15¼ inches is what it says to mark it. So I'm just going to mark it right here at 15¼ inches. And then it shows an X to the right of that mark. So I'm going to X it. In the instructions, it then says to move my tape measure to that very first measurement. And then I'm simply going to mark 16 inches the whole way along for the rest of the length of the board. Now, if you're like me, you probably can't count 16, 16, 16, but that's no problem because on the tape measure, it's actually marked out in red if you've never noticed. 16, 32's in red, 48, 64, and so on. We have everything marked. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to double check to make sure that they're flush on the end. And we're just going to take a speed square like this, line it up with your line, and we're going to mark the line on both 2x4s. And we're going to X both 2x4s at the same time. Okay, now that we have all of our joist headers marked out for our on centers, we're going to carefully carry those over to all of the runners, making sure that we're careful to ensure that we're not mixing up our very first measurement. If you get these boards flipped around, you're going to get your floor system built and then all of your sheeting won't line up. Hold this so that the X's are facing to the inside on this end header. Same thing with the other header on this side. Okay, now that we have our joist headers just temporarily in place, we're going to bring a few of the floor joists over and connect the outside and maybe a couple floor joists on the inside because we're going to work on leveling everything up. That's our next step. Okay, our next step is that we've brought some of the joists over and we've laid them in place just basically temporarily. We're going to start to fasten the outside of our wood frame together using the galvanized nails that were provided with the kit. We're going to show you basically how to use the galvanized nails that came with the kit. However, once we fast forward a little bit, we are going to be using a nail gun, which is not provided, and nor are those nails. So just so you know, all of the nails are provided with the kit for using a regular hammer, but we are going to use a pneumatic nail gun to speed up the process. So we're gonna go ahead and start fastening a couple of these joists together, and then we're gonna come back in just a few minutes. We're gonna talk about leveling and structure acceptance. Putting 2 nails per floor joists, and we're actually trying to make sure that each nail is 3/4 of an inch or an inch down from the top and bottom. When you're attaching your floor joist, you're going to want to make sure that you keep it on the line, and you're going to want to make sure that you keep the floor joist on the correct side of the X. The other thing that we're paying attention to is making sure that the floor joist is actually flush with our outer header. Okay, now that our floor frame has been constructed, the next step that we have to do is get everything square and placed on the runners provided as per the manufacturer's instructions. Our building is 12 by 16, so we're gonna set our outside runners flush with the outside of the frame of our floor system, and then we're gonna measure 4 foot to the center for our next runner and 4 foot to the center for our following runner, and then we're gonna line up our last runner flush with the outside of the floor system. So the next step is to toenail the floor system down to our runners using these 8D 2.5-inch nails that are provided. We're gonna show you how we're gonna be using the nails that came with the kit itself, but once we get moving, we are going to power up the pneumatic nail gun just to go ahead and finish it off. In our particular case, we're gonna go ahead and toenail it close to the outside of the floor frame, and then we're just gonna go right beside each one of the floor joists, toenailing down into the runner. Once we do that, we're gonna toenail everything in place according to the instructions, and then we're gonna level the structure. In our particular case, we are putting our shed on a gravel base. You may be putting your shed on any sort of situation in your backyard or driveway system or whatever. You would check with your local code enforcement office to make sure that you're having everything properly supported underneath as per local code instructions. Okay, now that our floor system has been toenailed to the outer runners, we want to line up the inside runners, and we're going to line them up on this particular building at 4 foot and 8 foot. And we're going to take a measurement from the front of the building to the back in order to get those to line up. Okay, our first runner is in place. Now we're going to toenail our floor system to that first runner. Yep. Okay, we've aligned our first runner at 4 foot. Now we've aligned our second runner at 4 foot, and we're going to toenail everything accordingly. Okay, now that we have our 4x4 runners in place and they're toenailed on the outsides, the next thing we have to make sure is that when we toenail our 2x4 floor system down to the runners, that the 2x4s are straight. Really the easiest way to do this, and if you remember back at the beginning of the video, we measured 15.25 inches from the beginning, and then once we set up our first 2x4 floor joist, then we were able to measure roughly 16 inches and we marked our X's. We're going to use that same method to make sure that the 2x4s are straight. It's imperative that your 2x4s are straight because when we put our floor sheeting down, if they're not straight, the floor sheeting could not line up properly. The best way to make sure that our measurements don't move on down the line is to go ahead and mark a straight line on the 4x4 runner to get started. So I'm going to hook my tape measure on the outside. I'm going to measure 15.25 inches to the left side as per the instructions. Once I do, I'm going to press down so there's weight on it, and we're going to put a line. Now we know when we toenail, if our board moves, we can tap it back in place before we take the rest of our measurements. Keep in mind, the very first 2x4 floor joist we set at 15.25 inches to this side. Once we toenailed this down, now we're going to simply hook it and go to 16 inches to the left side the whole way across. Once we find our 16 inches, we're going to push down on the board, hold it, and we're going to go ahead and mark the runner. And then we will toenail accordingly. We're going to continue this step for the rest of our floor joists. Okay, we've repeated all of the steps that we just talked about previously with making sure that our floor frame system is toenailed down into our 4x4 runners. The very next step is to make sure that our floor system is square. It is imperative that the floor system is not kind of square, not close to square, it's perfectly square. The easiest way to do this is to pull diagonal measurements across the floor system, ensuring that both measurements are exactly the same. In this particular case, we've done that. And to get the measurements to line up, sometimes you might have to push the front of the floor system to the right or to the left, or vice versa. And you keep doing that until both measurements are identical. We have a pile of 3/4 inch plywood for the floor sheeting. And according to the instructions, we're going to start our first set of floor sheeting, which is 2 full pieces. And we start the next row with a half a piece to stagger the seams. A couple things for safety. You're going to want to make sure that your cord is out of the way so that you don't trip over it when you're cutting. That's number one. Number two, obviously, you're going to want to make sure that you have your safety goggles on. The third thing is, some people don't understand that the proper way to cut a board is having the fat part of the saw on the part on the part of the sheeting that's supported in this particular case. In other words, sometimes somebody might try to come the other way, and on the part of the sheet that you're cutting, they put the fat part of the saw on it, and it's actually dangerous. So again, the key is that part of the saw is on the part that's actually supported, not on the part that you're cutting. Okay, to fasten the floor sheeting down, we're going to use the 8D 2.5 inch nails that were provided. For the purposes of the video, we're going to get it started with these, but then we are going to use the pneumatic air nailer to speed the process up. The other thing that you're going to want is a chalk box. Once we get our sheeting lined up with the outside corners and flush, we're then going to chalk our line on the sheeting so we can make sure that we're nailing into the floor joists. The other thing that we're going to do is make sure that we have the nicer side of the piece of plywood up. In this particular case, the lettering on the piece of plywood is actually on the side that we're going to face down. If you look, this side of the plywood is actually smoother and nicer, so this is the side that we're going to use on the upside. As a reminder, during the floor sheeting process, we are staggering all of the seams. So we're going to start our next run with half of a sheet. Keep in mind during the floor sheeting process that where the seams come together, you want to be almost in the dead center of each floor joist, as you can see here. Okay guys, now that we have everything sheeted, the last thing we want to do before we start setting our walls in place is to make sure one more time that everything is level. After we sheeted everything, we did have to jockey the building around a little bit, the floor system if you will, and we double checked for level, and as you can see, we're right exactly where it needs to be.